tonight's meeting with Senator Andrew Zwicker of Legislative District 16 here in the great state of New Jersey, the Garden State. Really appreciate everyone joining us this evening. A couple of housekeeping issues. If you could please put your actual name on your little Zoom box, and you can do that. You click the three dots in the upper right-hand corner, or you can also do that in the menu, and then you just click rename and put yourself there. We're really pleased to be joined with so many awesome partners for this meet and greet. And of course, I think we're around the corner from getting together in person and having a chance to enjoy some local New Jersey products. We generally do these meet and greets, so don't be too disappointed at a brewery. So folks can choose from the clean drinking water that we're so dependent on for a good, healthy economy, or one that's made into a beverage like beer as well. It's dependent on clean drinking water. But we have a number of partners who made tonight possible. In addition to us at New Jersey LCV, the New Jersey Conservation Foundation is a co-sponsor, the Pinelands Preservation Alliance, ANJAC, which is the Association of New Jersey Environmental Commissions. Also, New Jersey Audubon is a co-sponsor, and the Coalition for the Delaware River Watershed. And one thing that's clear is to get things done that even are easy, often is challenging. And we need strong partners in the environmental community and strong partners in the legislature and elected officials to get that done. And so we hope tonight will be a conversation, and I encourage you all to just ask questions in the chat. That's the little bubble on the bottom of your screen. And if you don't see it, there's three dots, and then you can see more menu items. And you just, anything you have for Senator Zwicker, feel free to put into the chat. But we're going to get started because we have a unique opportunity in a limited amount of time to talk to someone who has been a great champion for the environment, a friend to New Jersey LCV and partner organizations, and now is lucky to represent us in the Senate here in New Jersey. Also, if you could just keep yourself muted, you keep your video on, that's totally cool. We'd love to see you. A little bit about Senator Zwicker. Senator Zwicker was the first Democrat ever to win in the 16th legislative district. Prior to his time in the legislature, he taught classes in bioethics and writing at Princeton University and was named one of the 75 leading contributors to physics education in the United States by the American Association of Physics Teachers. As a state Senate member, he sits on the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Higher Education, Labor, and Military and Veterans Affairs. And prior, he was in the Assembly where he chaired the Science Committee. So I'm just wondering, maybe as a first question, to say thank you again for coming, how you doing, and when is the Senate going to get a Science Committee? There's only science in the Assembly? What's going on?
Thank you, Ed. I'm glad to be here. I'm looking forward to a new invitation somewhere down the road where we are sitting around a table with purified, fermented beverages around us of our choosing. Someone said to me, Ed, you've been a senator at this point like 2 weeks. Why don't you have a science committee yet?
Yeah, there you go. So I'm number 2 on the list.
Yeah, exactly. I've been a senator now for 2 months. It's really is a pleasure. I think I was so happy when the Assembly Speaker created the Science Committee and asked me to chair it, because so much of our world now is science and technology driven. Sometimes so much of our solutions and sometimes so much of our problems. And so that was just a tremendous pleasure. The Senate is a different beast, and I agree that there should be a science committee in both houses, but we'll get there.
Okay, I'm gonna hold you to that. So what is the biggest surprise now that you're in the Senate? Anything different that stands out from your time in the Assembly?
So let's see, on the fun side, we just did Read Across America, and I was in a first grade class. And when the teacher introduced me, said, well, he was an assemblyman, now he's a senator. And this 7-year-old, 8-year-old said, well, what do you assemble? But senator, everyone seems to know what that is. I think,
cool.
I got the first grade constituency all set right now. I think the difference, if you will, is the obvious part. It's half the number of members with the ability to, in principle, try to get even more done, which is nothing. I mean, I genuinely miss my colleagues in the assembly, my time in the assembly. But the Senate does have the ability, because of the size of its body, to be more influential. But we're just getting off the ground. Of the 4 committees that you listed, only 3 have had their first committee hearings so far.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, the last one that I haven't met yet, higher ed, will meet on Monday. So we're just going through that process, and we've only had a few voting sessions on pretty straightforward legislation. And then the rest of it, which is not environmentally related, is around judicial appointments and appointments to boards and commissions. But it's really been a pleasure. Most of the senators have been there for significant periods of time. And so, as a new person, that provides both, I think, unique opportunities, but also take some time, just like I did in the assembly, because I am the outlier. I'm the physicist, I'm the scientist, I'm the one who works on fusion energy. So, I'm also building up my connection to all my Senate colleagues.
Awesome. It sounds good. What is it like, the culture there, as far as like with COVID and the restrictions? And I know some of those have been lifted. The plastic barriers seem to have been removed. Are there opportunities for more of that collegiality and having those conversations? I know Zoom was kind of put a lot of distance between people, and sort of give us a flavor for what's the State House feeling like these days.
So I think that something else I should have mentioned. So from the legislative perspective, the other huge difference, and I'm shocked at what a difference this is, the Senate caucus meets around a table because it's smaller. The Assembly caucus meets in classroom style rows. And that sitting around a table automatically creates a better sense of both collegiality, but also it's just so much easier to talk, because right now we're looking at all the boxes of each other. Normally we'd be sitting around a table. That surprised me a little bit, of how much easier it was just to talk. We were, the governor gave his budget address yesterday, and we're in this weird hybrid state. I was in Target over the weekend, and I took off my mask, all right? And I'm vaxxed and boosted and post-Omicron, all right? And it was just weird. In the same way that it was weird to put on a mask, now it's weird to take off a mask. And you can see that happening in the State House, just like in all of our daily lives. My wife's a school teacher, and the Monday was lifting of the mask mandate in school. She teaches elementary school, same thing. But I again return to my 7-year-old constituency. They have adjusted quickly and easily, and I think we will as well. We'll see that in the State House. We'll see that everywhere in our daily lives.
So again, those of you who are joining us, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We've got a number of them flowing in, so I want to thank you guys for that. A couple more things just to get the ball rolling. Tell us a little bit about what your future plans are. So what do you see yourself working on in the coming years? And then particularly as environmental organizations that are hosting this, what do you see as opportunities and challenges for addressing environmental issues?
Right. I have 3 buckets, if you will, of focus, which isn't to say that that's what I exclusively work in, but it is where I tend to concentrate. These are the same 3 buckets that I would have answered at any point in my assembly career, and they remain the same in the Senate. One of them is environmental, but the first one, quite honestly, is just about democracy and voting, because I know everyone in this Zoom chat, everyone listening on Facebook, is well aware of how fragile our democracy is, and how much has gone on in other states, not in New Jersey, when it comes to chipping away at the right to vote. And so one of the things that I think we could talk about environmental issues, and we're going to. We could talk about economic issues. We could talk about whatever type of issues you want, but if our democracy itself is threatened, I don't want to say it's the most important, because climate change, global warming, obviously the devastating impacts is critical, but it's where I think and I worry quite a bit. And so, I was proud to be instrumental in writing the early voting law and the ability to fix your mail-in ballots and to get the data that was necessary to try to avoid gerrymandering, the redistricting that just happened, and other ways to communicate with legislators. And that's all things I did in the Assembly. One of the things I've been concentrating on is, with all of my colleagues, making sure, as we know, there was a lot of confusion this past November in New Jersey about voting results, gubernatorial voting results. People had me losing up until 1 o'clock in the morning. And I ended up,
but yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, but Ed, you had insight, you study these sort of things, where it is, but out on, NJ.com, it was, I lost and I won by more than 5,000 votes. So that's number one.
Yeah.
Number two is, I've spent my entire professional career working on non-carbon sources of energy. And many of you know, I work on fusion energy. And I'm going to take this moment to say, watch, here's a little sneak preview, St. Patrick's Day, huge announcement coming out of the White House when it comes to accelerating the development of fusion energy. And the idea perhaps that, the joke goes, fusion energy source of the future, always has been, always will be. But this idea that we could have another lever along with solar and wind or geothermal or hydro, but non-carbon energy, and fusion is getting there. Commercialization is still a way off, but we're headed in that direction. But I've been working on this, it's why I went and studied what I did in school. And so whether that's energy production or transmission, and then whether it is just environmental protection overall, it's where I come from. It's one of the things that motivated me. And then the last thing I would say in my third bucket is, how can innovation, broadly defined, because my science committee was the Science, Innovation, and Technology Committee, how can innovation both make our lives better, but also create jobs and economic opportunities? And New Jersey is the densest state for many reasons, but it's also the densest state for scientists and engineers. And how can we, as Governor Murphy has often talked about, return to our, we were Silicon Valley before there was a Silicon Valley roots. And so I spend a lot of time looking at how we can get great ideas out of the laboratory and help to commercialize them and make sure that people are trained up for these high quality and high paying jobs of the 21st century.
So just to put a finer point, when Senator Zwicker says when he was in the Assembly, he worked on the early voting, I think he kind of glossed over that massive change that we all experienced in the last election. But the reason you can, vote by mail without an excuse, and then in this case, vote in person in your local municipality and county, and then the drop-off locations, all of that was done on bills that he sponsored. And so, folks don't have to worry if they're working on election day anymore. They've got a window of time and opportunities on the weekends to get out and vote, and for making sure participation is accessible and happening. And that's one of the most important things we can do. And unlike other states where that's being rolled back, New Jersey's been advancing that, which is awesome. One of the priorities we put on our common agenda was the same-day voter registration effort. Can you talk a little bit about that and what that might look like? Because I know that would be new for us. Now currently you have to register sometime in advance, and people move and they forget, and then they want to go vote and they get turned away. And that can be problematic. Although you can always do a provisional ballot, so you're never really turned away, but you have to go back to wherever you moved from, unless you were in a different state. So talk a little bit about same-day voter registration.
Sure, and you're very kind, Ed. Nothing gets passed without 21 votes in the Senate and 41 in the Assembly, and lots of people worked really hard on some of the measures that I did talk quickly about. We could go into details on any of these. In terms of same day, so it is, I am convinced, it's just a matter of when, not if. We are going to get the same day. And I don't remember the statistics that other states have shown about the importance of getting voters engaged when they have the ability to register exactly on that day. But it's very significant, 6, 7, 8% increase, whatever it might be. So we're going to get there. There's a couple of things that need to happen. because you're also right. We have thrown so much at our election officials and so much at the infrastructure that underlies our elections. And so counties across New Jersey have had to buy new voting machines to handle early voting. They've had to buy, and many of you saw that, the electronic poll books now, because that's a key part of early voting. It'll become a key part of same-day registration as well. And some of the confusion around what happened this past November was just training up poll workers, which in a time of COVID was an issue just to get enough poll workers in the first place, which is why you've seen the legislature move to increase pay to try to increase the incentives for people to come out and work the polls. But along with the training of the equipment, there's also the computer infrastructure that's underneath that, the state voting registration system. And that is also relatively old, in the same way that we know, and we've seen all the headlines, that the unemployment system had major issues because of the volume it had to deal with COVID. Motor vehicles had issues. We want to make sure that we've got same day ready to go, which means not just training the workers, making sure the electronic poll books are in place, but also the database behind it is ready. So there had been some movement. The bill got pulled back just to make sure we were good to go. But like I said, I'm actually very confident that we're going to, I can't tell you exactly when, but I'm confident that we are going to get to same day voter registration in New Jersey.
Definitely a seasoned politician. No commitment on the date, but a commitment on the goal. I was going to ask
you. April 23rd.
Well, I was going to ask
tell you what year though.
Yeah, it was going to be in time for this year's election, but I think you described some of the challenges, and I think it's responsible to look at what you're passing if it's at all possible or feasible with the infrastructure issues you mentioned. Right. So one of the pieces of legislation that you're sponsoring is a joint resolution to do a constitutional amendment on environmental rights. Can you talk a little bit about that, and why is it that the state is absent any mention of a right to clean water or healthy air that's not going to give you asthma or cancer, or land that's not full of toxins?
Right. Well, the answer to why it's absent is because we're working collectively together to get the green amendment that you're referring to in front of voters so that we can then amend our Constitution to make this a fundamental piece that we talk about. I started talking about democracy, but now we're talking about, as you said, Ed, a fundamental right to clean air and clean water. To me, what this is really about is a posture, if you will, a philosophy that everything that we do, because if we write it into the Constitution, then everything that we do is then has this lens of what is its impact on our environmental conditions? What is its impact when it comes to vulnerable communities? And we talk about this a lot. And New Jersey has one of the best environmental justice bills in the country. But when you amend the Constitution, what you're saying is it's time to move beyond the politics, because what can be done can also be undone. And that, to me, is the key thing here. At the same time, we want to make sure, when we talk about amending the Constitution, this is a very profound, fundamental thing that we're doing. And so we want to make sure that we understand what the implications are. And the good news is other states have gone through some of this. But when you amend the Constitution, you also, in principle, open yourself up into the judicial process. And so part of what has been going on is understanding, if we amend the New Jersey Constitution, what are those implications? But I'm a prime sponsor of it, along with Senator Greenstein, because I share the same values you share, that this is a fundamental right that needs to be enshrined into our Constitution.
Yeah, and in addition to supporting, a guarantee for, people that have environmental rights, one thing we've been kind of like beating the drum about is electric school buses, which seems like, on the face of it, like a little niche, like yellow school bus. But when you understand every day students are getting on the buses now, thankfully going back to school, and they're breathing in, toxic diesel fumes. And if you take yourself back to your youth, doesn't take long from go on a school bus again if you forgot what it was like. You just remember this stench, which the stench is pollution. And in addition to causing greenhouse gases and climate change, it's actually pretty acute and respiratory for our young people. And we've been pushing electric school buses for that reason, because the health is really critical. And because they require big batteries, they're only used 180 days a year. With vehicle to grid technology, they can be part of our storage solution. So for peak energy demands, which generally happen in the summer during cooling season, the buses are just sitting there waiting to power up our needs. So we don't have to put on dirty peaker plants. And when wind is made at night, when we're sleeping and not using our daytime office energy, they're getting filled back up for the daytime usage. And I know that's something that's important to you. What does that look like legislative prospect wise, the appetite, and what's the opportunity there?
You said something that just triggered another memory or another thought, which is when you talk about vehicle to grid, right? Ford is doing something really interesting with the F-150, which has got a couple 100,000 reservations, which is they're already heavily promoting the fact that you can use the fully charged truck to power your home or a tailgate party or a construction area or lots of different things.
Yeah.
But what it's doing, and you alluded to it when it comes to peak energy demand with school buses, what it's doing is it's starting to socialize among people who normally don't think about this, the idea that your vehicle can have multiple purposes when it comes to now power and power storage. I think it's going to, I really hope Ford is successful, because I think it will help change the mindset for people who normally would not consider an electric vehicle. In terms of your specific question, I'd also add, when you were on the bus, when I was growing up, all the cool kids sat in the back of the bus. I guess I was the nerdy kid up in the front. But, that of course is also the worst place to be on a school bus when you talk about young lungs and sensitive lungs, breathing in all of the pollution. Also, often we're talking about in urban areas where school buses and other heavy trucks and other buses are. These are the same places where air pollution is at its worst and heat islands are at its worst, and you can measure the health impact of all of this pollution. So this is really key. And I think the answer to this, Ed, and this is going to be sort of, in my opinion, a common theme about many of the initiatives that are coming up, comes down to finances and comes down to politics. And by that, I mean, we know that right now, the difference in the cost between a regular school bus and electric school bus is whatever it might be, all right? And so is the legislature, are the elected officials willing to help incentivize this? Because we're talking about money now to try to save money later, whether that is climate change mitigation or electrifying transportation. We know what those health costs are, but there's always that political calculation of being willing to spend the money now. I thought in the last session, on the assembly side, we were building up actually significant momentum towards getting this done. And then we ran into lame duck issues, right? And so that actually leaves me on the other side of this, as we're just starting off another 2-year session, feeling relatively optimistic that we can regain that momentum and get this over the finish line. So that's where I go into it right now.
Well, it's definitely good news. I mean, a school bus generally lasts about 10 years before they're replaced. So, even if you just look at the replacement, this year, however many will be bought, and then in 10 years we'd have none if we sort of incentivated each year. I'm going to put something in the chat here and I'm going to share it with folks, because you mentioned this, the Ford F-150, and this came from our partners in North Carolina. But today's cost to fill a Ford F-150, this might have been yesterday, so it might be a little higher today, is for which goes roughly 650 miles, is $108.50. And it costs you $37,700 to buy it. If you had an electric Ford F-150 Lightning, you could charge it 3 times at a cost of $41.73. And the cost of one of those vehicles is $39,900. $974. And in New Jersey, there's no sales tax on electric vehicles. So that's about 7%, six something. And then in addition, you get $5,000 potentially back in rebates, and you have this gas savings, or we would call it electric savings. I also have to remind myself to say accelerator and not gas pedal. But this is the math. And what you mentioned is, in the beginning, the math doesn't always work. When electric vehicles first came out, the math was not really in our favor, but this is today's real numbers, and it's starting to catch up. And to be innovative and get ahead and make sure we have the infrastructure, that's the kind of things that's been happening under the governor and with the legislature support to put in the infrastructure necessary as we kind of go forward there. And so I think I want to move to a question folks had asked in the chat. And this one comes from Janet. Senator Zwicker, do you believe New Jersey communities are aware and prepared for the plastic bag and paper bag legislation that's going into effect in May? I'm adding a little bit here. For grocery stores over 2,500 square feet, that also bans polystyrene foam food service products, which goes into effect on May 4th. What will the legislature be doing to help amplify awareness of the programs prior to that date, which is just a couple months away? And what else would you like to see New Jersey do to reduce our single-use plastics?
Okay, I'm actually fairly optimistic about what's about to happen, and I'd only say this because of my own lived experience and what I've seen. But there certainly have been towns that are already have taken it upon themselves to ban plastic bags. And beach towns that have said way before we did it at the state level that it was just time, enough was enough. And I remember when I was at the Jersey Shore and went into a local supermarket right after they had done it. And I thought there was going to be confusion and anger or frustration. And I was only in there for, let's say, 20 minutes. It was smooth as could be. And that was a few years ago, right? But that has stuck with me as a reminder that people are adaptable, that change is difficult. Convenience of plastic bags are, of course, we all know what they are, but we also know what the environmental concern with them is. I think I once gave a talk at the Watershed where I'd done the calculation, and if you take all of the plastic bags made in the world in a single year and you stack them up together, it's the equivalent height of like 2/3 of the way between the Earth and the moon. I don't remember the exact number, but it's something staggering, right? Because it's billions.
Right, in New Jersey alone, it's 4.4 billion plastic single-use bags we use a year.
Right. So I actually think that the transition, there'll be grumblings, of course, right? But I think the transition is going to happen relatively smoothly. So I'm actually pretty confident. In terms of the question about, or how I interpreted it to mean, how do we just sort of reduce overall plastic consumption? I think that, and I would say overall consumption. Today in my town was recycling day, number one, right? And I think everyone on this call probably knows that while it's great to continue to try to recycle, that currently our recycling program, does not result in a significant amount of actual recycling. That leads us to either reusing or reducing. And to me, the place where we can make, as a policymaker, can make a significant impact is in ways that we can reduce overall production of containers and various things. My former colleague in the Assembly, John McKeon, just put out an interesting bill because he got an Amazon package, and I don't know the exact details, but right, he bought a little something on Amazon, and it came in a small box inside of a bigger box, inside of a bigger box, and he ended up with this giant box. And he was just so astounded by that. And without, I understand also, there's a lot of other carbon costs in just transporting whatever that little thing was, but he was just astounded by just the waste going into ordering some little thing. So I think we have to look at ways to reduce how much of our packaging is used with plastic, for instance. I don't have an answer for that, but it seems to me that's the place where we're going to want to be able to, we ban certain things and we look for ways to try to reduce how much packaging, how much plastic is being used.
Yeah, we also worked on a piece of legislation on recycled content to require more and more of our plastics to use the materials we're recycling at the curb to create a market to drive the purchase. And therefore, this problem with China was not taking our recycling anymore. And these horror stories of it going into regular landfills. We need a market. And so I think the legislature has done a good job in that space. I'd also mention, a lot of folks with the plastics, single-use plastics, they kind of understand the plastic bag floating in the tree or tumbleweed along our highways and roads and into our waterways and choking our streams. But the paper part of this, I just kind of want to remind folks, in New Jersey right now, to satiate our paper consumption, we cut down the equivalent of 1,000 trees in a single year just for the paper bags that we currently use. So the paper bag part of this legislation that's going into effect is really important too, because trees are a great carbon sink. And the solution really to bringing home our groceries and other items is in our trunk for the most part and in our closet, which is the reusable bags we forget to bring with us. And yes, we need to make sure we're supplying them for our people who can't afford it, low income, moderate income families. But there are a lot of New Jerseyans who have these bags and just don't bring them. And so it's going to be a little bit of a transition, but I'm with you. I don't think it's going to be quite as abrupt as many are gearing up to. There's some education and outreach all of us can do to help with that as well. So next question is, we're going to just switch a little. I don't mind taking questions on other things. I hope it's okay. But I know yesterday the governor talked a lot about education in his budget address. It was a big piece of his investments in pre-K. Previously, I was on the school board. I was a teacher, so I like this question in particular. So Robert Becker asked, when is the legislature going to take the school funding formula over and make adjustments to it in the area of affordable housing, and make sure that we are reducing costs so that more funds can go to environmental programs. So there's sort of three prongs to that, right? There's affordable housing, school funding, and investments in environmental programs.
Okay, I'll try to get all three of them. So Senator Gopal who's now chair of the Senate Education Committee because Senator Ruiz has become the majority leader, just in the last month put forth a bill to look again at the school funding formula. And the person who wrote in the chat talked about it when it comes to housing and money following the student, but there's transportation costs. We talked about transportation that before that have gone up dramatically. Special education costs have gone up dramatically. This has been studied, and there's no doubt that we need to go back to that formula and adjust for these things because it's a basic fairness issue. Some of you may know that there's a court case going on right now where the state of New Jersey is being sued for having segregated schools. I would, and that's not my term, other people have said that New Jersey actually has apartheid schools because the segregation in New Jersey can be so extreme. And that segregation finds itself making its way back to housing being segregated. And so it's all interconnected. I will tell you a quick story as an aside. I grew up in Bergen County in Englewood, New Jersey in the early 70s. And Englewood did something really interesting, which is now being discussed more and more, which is Englewood then and still is a very diverse town, but it's broken up into 4 wards. And of those 4 wards, 2 are predominantly white, 1 is predominantly Black, and the one where I lived was predominantly diverse. And Englewood back in the 70s started busing kids, instead of going to your closest elementary school, they started busing us across town. That's not much, we're not a very big town, that wasn't a very big town, but it led to a really wonderful educational ecosystem because it broke down some of these boundaries. So that's a little bit of a separate thing which is going on, but there have been also legislative initiatives to start to say, how can we best also break down some of the municipal boundaries and look at magnet schools and other schools that aren't exclusive and are inclusive, and helping to break down the more, until we can get to the more fundamental issue, which comes to housing. How can we, at least with our young people, start to increase their educational opportunities in a way that is really going to work for our students? So that was a little bit of school funding, there's a little bit of housing, there's a third pillar to that.
Let me ask you about the environment, more specific question,
Yeah.
environmental planning. So the governor proposed to raid through a diversion from the Clean Energy Fund, another roughly $83 million to plug a hole in New Jersey Transit's budget. Now, he was proudly saying we're not increasing fares, but we're really doing that on the backs of people who pay their electric bill and pay an extra fee called the societal benefits charge, which is supposed to go into efforts to make our energy cheaper through energy efficiency for low and moderate income families. That's insulation, doors and windows. Literally, heat from people's homes is going out the window, and $82 million or $3 million is going to New Jersey Transit that could help make New Jersey more affordable for the most in need, where the costs of things like this, are more apparent and hit hard on those budgets. What is your sense? Are we able to get that money added back in? I mean, I'm not going to say which legislator said it to me yesterday, but said, hey, we're kind of flush, right? We had the bailout money from the federal government last time around. Tax revenues are up because things are opening back up. It seems to me we should get rid of that budget gimmick. And people who are paying a fee on their electric bill, the money should go dedicated back to that purpose. And it's not just, Democrats and Republican governors previously have used this gimmick. You think there's a way to get that done?
Sure, right? I mean, I think it's societal benefit charge is one of many fees, charges that New Jersey consumers have that was intended for one thing and then sometimes is being diverted for others. And this is one which has for years been a major, major issue. And the problem really comes down to not having a dedicated source of funding for New Jersey Transit.
Agree with that. Yeah.
Right. And, yes, I understand that the amount of the raid of the SBC has decreased, but 80 whatever million dollars, like you said, is not a small amount of money whatsoever. So I think there's a bunch of different things here, right? Look, we know that New Jersey Transit needs to get better in lots of different ways. We know that mass transportation reduces the use of combustion engines, cars, trucks, etc. So for that, tie it back to the environment that way. Do I think that it is possible? Yes, I do think that it is possible. I am encouraged by the reduction of the societal benefit charge rating, of course, but at the same time, it does continue. So I think it's possible. I think, look, the governor's, like you said, Ed, the governor's budget address was yesterday. There is now, we go through the budget process. I'm glad to be on the Senate Budget Committee. This is a interesting time to put forth a budget because there's a couple of things about flush. Well, what does flush mean? First, you talk about all the federal money, the billions of dollars of federal money, and the chance to do some profoundly important infrastructure and things that we've just neglected for a long time, and get those off of the budget table or budget needs, because then it starts to become even more possible to go, okay, we don't need to raid SBC because we can go ahead and get NJT's funds from whatever we're going to get it from. So I think it's possible. At the same time, right, everybody right now thinks whatever your project is possible. And so how do you prioritize this is going to be the really interesting part of the next couple months in the budget process in the legislature.
Yeah, and I did say yes to what you said, but I want to be clear. Yes, New Jersey Transit needs a dedicated funding source, and no, it shouldn't be the societal benefits charge from the Clean Energy
I didn't mean to suggest that either. Right.
I was so enthusiastic because we asked for both, and in advance of the budget, we've sent that communication to all the legislators, including yourself, because we think it's important. Transit can help get cars off the roads, but they do have dirty diesel buses right now. They're moving towards electrification, so those funds are not dedicated toward clean purposes. So that is sort of an issue and something that caught our eye.
I also just say very quickly, someone, I don't remember who it was, brought in a electric bus. It stopped off at Princeton University a few months ago. It was a pleasure. We just went on a little tour. It was quiet. Most important thing, it was quiet. You could talk before you even get, of course it was clean, but you could just hear each other. It was such a pleasure to be on that bus as they did a little tour for us.
Well, they're adding Wi-Fi to New Jersey Transit, so I guess you can turn your speakers up while you're on the diesel bus. But we want quicker electrification, and so I guess the other thing is we have. I'm going to post something because you mentioned this about communities. There's an article from the Washington Post, and I know it's got a paywall, but it talks about the impact of redlining on affordability, but most importantly on the toxicity of air, water, and land in communities of color because of those policies, because of systemic racist policies. And I just put that in the chat for folks to take a peek at. There was another question here from Tom. He says, thank you very much for joining many of our groups for a recent release of a report on building electrification. This is converting from fossil fuel over to electric. And what do you think it will take to make progress on this issue in the legislature, given the deliberate misinformation campaigns that are being waged by folks from the fuel merchants?
A deliberate information campaign which is part of what that press conference was about, right? I think it takes two things, right? One is we as environmentalists need to be relentless because the other side of whatever the environmental issue is going to be relentless. I think the other thing that came out of the report that Tom's referencing, which is really important, is what we see in other states is that, like any other market demand that's new, right? At first, it's a supply and demand thing. And at first, the cost of that upfront cost is often, just like we talk about electric cars, is often higher than whatever the traditional technology is. And so the role of government, in my opinion, is to help to incentivize that and reduce that cost differential down. You mentioned in the introduction $5,000 coming from the state for purchasing of electric vehicles. What we need, and what we talked about during that press conference, is a similar sort of rebate like we see in Massachusetts, and I think Connecticut might have done it as well. Yeah. Because we know that if given the choice of a high quality product, right, if the cost is here, then certain people just won't be able to afford it if it's just too expensive. So public policy can then drive that down so people can afford it. And then as demand goes up, price goes down, and then that difference changes, which means that the incentive that we need to provide shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it goes to zero. I think that's exactly what we need to do, right? And then from just a straight up PR campaign, right? There's a lot of misinformation, using Tom's word now, about what is in the energy master plan, what is required in the energy master plan, what is mandated and what is not mandated. And that's, powerful stuff that needs to be countered with the same vigorous type of campaign. Otherwise, people aren't going to know, right? And this message of the government's going to force you to spend $20,000 that you don't have to replace your heater that you don't need to replace. Of course, people, if they hear that message, go, well, that doesn't make any sense. And we know that's not what's really going to happen, but that's a powerful message to counteract.
Well, my oil provider is the president of the fuel merchants, and they sent me a very nice email with lots of misinformation, which I replied to, and surprisingly did not get a reply to my my question, did you actually read the Energy Master Plan like I did? Because you would see that these are just not true things. So yes, we have our work cut out for us. And cost is something with inflation coming that folks are going to be talking about. And there is the cost reality which is that electrification is saving folks money. Biden talked about this in his State of the Union just last week, where he said the move through the climate bill at the federal level would save families $500 a year. That's the reality. Folks will try to tell you something different, but that's the math on it. And that's critical. Someone asked the question, Callie, about something we're seeing across the state. And I don't know if you have an opinion about this, so you could just say, I'm looking into it, it's fine. But we're seeing this in my hometown as well, warehouses. More and more of our prime agricultural lands are being threatened by warehouses. More and more of our business parks and potential parks to go and recreate in are being gobbled up. And you mentioned the John McKeon's Amazon package that was a box in a box in a box. We're all ordering more online. We're part of this problem. They're building more warehouses, and it's haphazard. You could have it reminds me a lot of Texas. You go to a school is next to an oil refinery. They don't have zoning. We've got these warehouses popping up all over the place. What are your thoughts about that, and what legislative tools might there be, like a moratorium on warehouses or estate planning that designates certain areas for warehouses that make sense because they're in the right corridors and lower impact, et cetera? Like, this is becoming something that's affecting nearly every community, urban, suburban, and rural.
So I think about warehouses, before we even get to the question about building new warehouses, I just think about our existing inventory of warehouses in New Jersey and how much energy they consume, and depending upon their age, how inefficient they are, right? Some of these older ones in particular, are just not well insulated. These enormous structures with lots of open space, and they're consuming vast amount of energy. Before I was a legislator, I was part of a United States Department of Energy innovation hub on energy efficiency in buildings that was headquartered in the Philadelphia Navy Yard. And I was part of a bit of the workforce development, and Penn State was the principal investigator in it. But 40% of our country's consumption of energy are in buildings. And so one of the lowest hanging fruits is, how do we just make sure that our existing warehouses are as energy efficient as possible? Because it's clear, and you alluded to it, right? Online shopping, for obvious reasons in COVID, exploded. But I don't think that's, we may come down a little bit, but it's not going away anytime soon. So that's the first piece of that. The second piece to it is you, I think, got to how I look at this in the sort of statewide, right? Which is, for instance, where I live in central New Jersey, I'm not too far from exit 8A off of the New Jersey Turnpike, which already, number one, close to the Turnpike, close to the airport, and already has no residents in the area I'm thinking of, and warehouses. So, I'm not thinking about permeable land at this point. I'm just thinking about where to situate them, and truck traffic and everything else. I certainly am going to want to plan to put them as close to as possible to the major highways. In particular, the example I'm giving is the Turnpike. The rest of this comes down to the politics of home rule and the 500 plus municipalities that New Jersey has, and who gets to decide this. And so the last piece you said, Ed, which is always the key, but the tough one, is New Jersey has periodically, in lots of different things, come up with statewide plans that sometimes have some teeth and sometimes get stuck on a shelf, and we all give ourselves a little pat on the back for writing the plan. But if we don't, like anything else that's haphazard, and I've seen the image you're talking about of a swing set with a refinery in the background of the swing set, right? I've seen that image. That's exactly what's going to happen. Is your bucolic little town of blank is all of a sudden going to have a giant warehouse from an online company sitting right there because it's tax revenue. So the key is going to be thoughtful and have a statewide plan of how to do this. And it's not as simple as I just said. I mean, yes, put it by the Turnpike, but really you got to start thinking about, but where, okay, that's how you fill the warehouse. How do you also maximize the efficiency for getting things to consumers, right? The major delivery companies, FedEx and Amazon, et cetera, have been using, and I'm going to nerd out for a second, artificial intelligence to come up with how to minimize, in their case, transit time, fuel costs, etc. We need to try to figure all this out, because what's that environmental impact on all of this?
Well, and some folks have put some suggestions here. We mentioned the state plan and giving it some teeth and actually having it updated. But Tom also mentioned Bill S-104, which prevents municipalities from redesignating farmland to warehouses. Or those kinds of uses. And that's just so important. We are the Garden State, and we have to fight to make sure we continue our agricultural roots, into the future as the most densely populated state. So there's a lot of great questions, only 9 minutes remaining. People can keep dropping them in the chat. I'm gonna try to go like a little bit to speed round. So one of the questions comes up from my friend Steve Stern, who did my first TV interview when I got on this job. So
Mine too.
Oh, really good. So I want to thank him for that. But he talked a little bit about an Eagleton Institute program that put PhDs with science backgrounds into legislative offices. And I know I served as a fellow, as an educator in a congressional office. That's how I transitioned into the work that I'm doing now. Any sense that that could get started, some program like that could get started back up?
Oh, no. So it has never gone away. So I'm proud to have started it and to push for the funding of it. So this program is to put recent PhDs in science, doesn't matter the field, into either a state department or into the legislature or into the governor's office. And this, I stole the idea from California, which is doing it at the state level, who stole it from the congressional programs. And we got a small startup grant to write the proposal, and I continue to push for the state of New Jersey to invest in that, and Rutgers Eagleton has gotten private investment. This program is wildly successful, and they're up to their
tell us a story. That was actually the question. I went from memory, I messed up, but we want to share a story of success. What is the poster child interaction that makes this make sense?
The poster child interaction is, there's so many, but the one I know best is Andrew McAllister, who got a PhD from Michigan, but is a New Jersey native, who was in the very first cohort and took a risk and said he, as much as he loved his research, he really wanted to be involved in public policy making. And so he applied to this program, he was accepted. He got randomly assigned to the assembly. And then because I had helped create it, he got assigned to my science committee. And he is now no longer a fellow. He has become a permanent staff member in the legislature, who's the key person when it comes to science and technology issues. To me, that's, and there, I just know that one, and that's the quick lightning answer. But there are people in Department of Health. There are people in DCA, Consumer Affairs, lots of places where they're all getting hired. And to me, that's a huge success, because this is about hiring analytical people who solve problems and putting them in some of the toughest problems we have. So I'm biased, but I'm just thrilled by the success of this program.
Well, congratulations. I think that sounds not only exciting, but it is a pathway that most scientists don't have into a public policy arena, which is just disconnected from the academic training you receive, which is critical. So one thing I want to chat about, and yesterday, the Friends of the School of Conservation. So this question comes from Julia Summers from Highlands Coalition. And they put in an application to the Department of Environmental Protection to take over the School of Conservation in Stoke State Forest. This has been for decades run by Montclair State University. And, over time, they tried to walk away a few times, but in the end, handed the keys over to the DEP and left it in fallow. A number of organizations on this call and others sort of helped the Friends get back on their feet. The legislature amazingly invested $1 million in funding to help get the programs back started up in Stoke State Forest at the school. They've been doing a great job. And it seems like Montclair is trying to get back in now. They saw $1 million and now they want the school back after they turned it over. And that's something we oppose. We think they haven't been good stewards. Certainly they can be involved in, with the group that the Friends have put together, which is a coalition of a number of universities, Ramapo, Rutgers, Sussex Community College, a number of outdoors group, youth organizations, particularly bringing young people from cities that don't have the wilderness that exists in Stoke State Forest. Joe Danielson, my assemblyman, said he remembered going up there and camping out, and it gave him a sense of nature that today he embodies from that one life-changing experience. I don't know that we had a chance to talk about it. It's something that's a high priority issue for us to have the Friends continue to trust this after what had happened into perpetuity. They have one singular mission. So I wanted to put that on your radar and just give you a chance if you have any comments about how that all rolled out and going forward.
Well, a couple of things. First, thank you to Julia for the conversation we've had in the past. And I was a proud sponsor of the legislation that provided the funding. From my perspective, I've had the same experience Joe Danielson had. I remember going to Stokes as a little kid. We didn't have the redwoods in New Jersey. You had Stokes. And next thing you know, you're sort of like, holy cow. I just went from being 15, 20 minutes from Manhattan to feeling like I'm in the middle of nowhere. And that was and remains a profound experience. And then when you add an educational component to that, you're not just protecting the forest itself, but making sure that whether it's me or Danielson or anyone else, that other kids have that profound experience, because it's hard to measure that, right? Mm-hmm. How do you know that you profoundly impacted a child? But if you put that child into a forest and provide the educational opportunities, you maximize that possibility. That has got to be the key. So I would be delighted to work not just with Julia, but everybody on how do we ensure that we're not having this battle. And I'm not talking about the battle with who is the steward, but I want to make sure that we are not having the battle over protecting the forest and the educational programs year after year after year. Because you said it, Ed, right? We're the Garden State. And if we cut that down, it's not coming back, right?
Well, and the young people that experience those programs, they're really the future legislators and leaders that we're going to depend on to continue on this quest, which is going to constantly be fought with challenges, more development that's going to be wanted, and all these different pressures. And it's going to take a pretty fortified young people today to protect it into tomorrow. We actually have it easier, believe it or not. And it's hard today. It's going to be harder tomorrow. And there actually is a bill up on the legislature in the Senate Environment Committee to put the trust of that school in the hands of the Friends of the School of Conservation. So we're supporting that and hope that makes its way through the legislature. We're running out of time. So I want to thank you, Senator. I see Sam Pessin. I don't know that you put in a question, but on Earth Day, the DEP is going to celebrate its 50th anniversary. It's delayed because of COVID, but it's going to be at Liberty State Park. And I just want to let people know you should show up, because we need to make sure that Liberty State Park is protected into the future from similar development pressures. And the Liberty State Park Protection Act is critical to pass and make sure, all these developers can get their hands off of the People's Park and keep it in the trust. We're going to be there celebrating Earth Day. I plan to be there on the 22nd, along with DEP celebrating its 50th anniversary. I hope all of you can go. There's going to be ability to have tables and different things like that. Let's have a strong showing for Liberty State Park and all the work that goes into environmental protection. That's one thing to look forward to into the future. Senator, congratulations on your election, the great few months that you've had, taking time tonight to share your thoughts with us. We appreciate it. We could keep going, no doubt. And you're got some great important work ahead of you. We stand with you to get that done and work in cooperation together. I mean, that's how we get things done in partnership.
Well, thank you, Ed. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the chance to have this conversation. Of course, wish we were together. Next time, let's drink a cold adult beverage in Stokes.
Let's do it. I love it. That'd be fun.
But look, the serious comment is, obviously, the work to protect the environment in New Jersey is never ending, often thankless. And I understand, sometimes you feel like it's whack-a-mole, because when you push on one, up comes something else. But without you, I mean, I can't say this enough, it wouldn't happen. So I am glad to partner with you, and will continue to do everything I can to fight for our environment and clean air and clean water and fusion energy.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. Appreciate everyone coming tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks all.
Sure.